Thank you, Sophia. Welcome to the first Q&A session with our STE thought leaders. You have just heard from the panel about the work in the agency and how they work with communities and leverage STE knowledge and skills to overcome our constraints as a nation state. For the next 30 minutes, they will be answering your questions. So if you have any burning questions for them, please raise them in the stage chat, and they will address them. With us today, we have Dr. Hazel Khoo from A*STAR, Dr. Johnny Wong from HDB, and Mr. Lam Wishan from LTA. Good morning, everyone.
Hi.
Morning.
So while waiting for our first question, I have one here. We've often said that technology is a means to an end. So how do you actually maximize its potential and at the same time balance that with the human touch? Dr. Khoo, would you like to go first?
Thanks, Roy, for that question. Very interesting question. I think I'm in a very fortunate sector, being in the food R&D. Food is very much what people consume. So at the back of mind, while we are trying to, in Singapore's context, trying to address the 30 by 30 national challenge in the area of food resilience and how do we produce it sustainably, yet there's always a nutrition that we want to deliver to consumers. And it is always about the food that we deliver to people. So that human element has always been, must be at the back of our mind when it comes to food R&D.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Khoo. How about Mr. Lam? Would you like to share in terms of mobility plans?
Well, happy to share that. I think in my presentation, I talk about when we look at land transport, we touches everyone when they move from one place to another, and that includes moving goods around as well. So we are very mindful that many of our policies, the engineering work or the infrastructures that we place are eventually having to serve our people and the economy. And so this aspect that we apply the engineering skills, but also have to make sure that the outcome is favorable. It is something that we are constantly trying to balance, as well as trying to use the best technology out there for this kind of impact.
Yeah, I think that's pretty important in terms of especially transport to be inclusive for everyone, right?
Indeed.
Yeah. How about Dr. Wong? How about share your experience in terms of public housing?
Okay, that's a quite good question. Maybe I just share, especially like technologies like us, we sometimes get a bit carried away about how this technology and all these urban solutions can actually be placed in our housing developments. But for HDB, we are very careful about it. So when we test the technical aspect, we do it in the lab. We make sure that all the safety aspects are taken care of. But we also have another step that we always do, and that is to bring some of this sometimes to test them in our housing estate so as to get user feedback. This is important because the technology must work with the people. And through this feedback, it helps us to kind of tweak it and make it easier. So I give an example. When we wanted to do some elderly monitoring systems, we actually went down to an older estate and we allow some of the residents to test it out and give us feedback and see how to improve it. And to us, what we always say is that the technology must be so invisible that people like the elderly who are not so tech savvy do not really have to read a whole thick manual in order to use it. So in this aspect, HDB has always been careful to make sure that whatever technology we introduce, the people don't feel it and they don't be stressed by it.
Oh, okay. I think that's pretty important point in terms of using technology and also at the same time remembering that the end users, whether from whether if they're elderly, if they are from the younger age group, whether will they be able to tap on them, to help them bring convenience to their daily lives. So a question came up during your presentation, Dr. Wong, with smart lighting will smart lighting encourage crime if places with fewer people are more poorly lit? Or is smart lighting actually motion sensorized?
Okay, actually this question goes very well with what I've said earlier. Now, when we wanted to introduce smart lighting, we were very careful. Now, all of you would have seen some movies where you see that the whole place is dark, and then when you walk, the lights up, and then those are motion sensors, and one will get very freaked out when you see that there's nobody there, but the lights come up.
Yeah.
It's not as scary as that. It took us a long time to study this. We wanted to save energy, so that's why we look at smart lighting. So what we do is that we don't shut off the light, but we just dim it to a level that it doesn't use much energy. So in this case, it's 30%. And we do a lot of studies to make sure that this 30% is still enough for visual, that one. Except that you probably would feel more comfortable if it was 100%, like for reading and things like that. So the lights will gradually comes up to 100%. And it's gradual, it's not sudden. Reason is because then you don't get a shock effect. And to put it smarter, so it's not just motion sensors, is that the system actually does an analytics to see rightly where you'll be moving and lights up even before you reach that place. So in a way, for the user, he doesn't feel that there is actually a kind of, it is smart lighting. He just walks by and he feels that it's actually lighted his path as a usual one. But in the meantime, it slowly dims off as he leaves the area. Yes. So there is smart lighting. And then, of course, in areas where there's a lot of people moving around, what happens is that it doesn't need to dim down. It just continues to stay at 100% because analytics has been done at what time, at what sort of instances, the light just needs to be 100%. So that's smart lighting.
Preempting where the person will move so that the lights will turn on in time. I think this is a very good example in terms of how you're actually using technology and at the same time also remembering that the human touch
and the user is the most important.
Yep. So you have one more question for Dr. Wong again. Okay. So why don't HDB have centralized heating and cooling system to save the environment? Is that sustainable for the environment? Okay.
To answer that question, maybe I touch on centralized cooling first. The concept of centralizing the cooling is a good one because that means that you don't each individually owns an air conditioning system. However, while the concept is good, you need to put deep thoughts into it. When you have centralized cooling, you need to think through what is the business model that's going to be introduced down there. Does it mean that everybody have to pay a subscription fee in order to be placed into this thing? Because right at the heart, HDB designs its flats to be naturally ventilated. In fact, we encourage no air conditioning if possible. Imagine if, let's say, somebody, because of the centralized cooling, he gets plugged in and because he's paying some sort of basic fee, even when he don't use it, it may encourage him to use air conditioning. And then there's a rebound effect down here. So we studied this carefully to make sure that this business model must work. I think after much study, happy to say that there was a company that approached us and we are seriously thinking of introducing to a new town, like in Tengah, to test this out, to see whether people are receptive towards it and but indeed use of centralized cooling, how receptive people is to subscribe to such systems and the services that it provides. And then if let's say it takes off, slowly maybe we will see how to propagate this to the rest. Now in terms of heating, actually based on our surveys and our study, interestingly that not many people use hot water. I know some people do, but not all households use hot water. Now if you have centralized heating, we're not so sure whether the business model will work or not, and if not enough people subscribe to it, the vendor probably may not have much business to go to. So when we introduce technology, very important to understand that another component we have to think about is the business model and the affordability, of course, to the users.
Yeah, I think that's a very important point that it's not only about the human touch, but in terms of economics behind the costs and benefits involved in it.
Correct.
Yeah. So I see that we have the importance of that we actually have a changing society with different changing demographics, and also that we need to keep adapting to our society needs itself. So I see that Dr. Wong, you have actually stayed on with HDB for 20 years. So it's indeed an impressive career. So what has actually motivated you to stay on with HDB for such a long time?
Well, there could be two reasons. One is that nobody wants me, that's why I have to stay in HDB. But jokes aside, I think it's because I'm given the opportunity to be very involved with some of this new technology that's introduced in HDB estates. And it's an exciting career for me. I have enjoyed it since I joined HDB. It gives me a chance to see and play around with new ideas. I think, as you know already, my other answers is that we have to look at the user, the usability and the UX or user experience. We have to look at the business model. So all these things is actually quite exciting. And okay, one thing that I always pride myself is that some of the new things that me and my team helped to introduce in HDB, we feel quite proud because we like to tell ourselves that without us, maybe that opportunity would not come. So it's been an exciting time for me all these 20 years.
It's indeed a very impressive one. So we also have one question coming from Mr. Lam and Dr. Khoo. How highly demanded are data analysts in your respective fields, and how they can influence and improve our daily lives? Perhaps Mr. Lam?
Well, happy to take these questions. And well, first of all, if you look at the land transport, we generate tons of data. We have EasyLink data, we have data on how the public transport is doing. We shared a lot of data through our data mall in the form of time bus arrivals and so on and so forth, vehicles and all. So with this large pool of data, we could certainly use these data to very good and evidence-based kind of first policy making. Second, adjusting on the ground how to do trade-off with a more evidence-based approach rather than a more subjective approach through surveys, for example. And so within LTA, we have a pool of data scientists that look at how we can put this data into good use for technology, further kind of exploitation, as well as policy formulations. But we believe that moving forward, the appreciations of data is not just residing in a small pool of people. And so across LTA, we are rolling out digital literacy programs. It could be for teams who are involved in constructions. They are now looking at building information and seeing how we could make use of those informations to do constructions in a more efficient way, track this closely, and also perform some simulations that tease out all the safety issues. And that's just one example. We also roll out that because, for example, at the management level, it is good to appreciate what kind of data that is worth collecting, what kind of data, if we collect too much, actually have an adverse effect in that we're not contributing that much to the environment, right? Because data and that carbon emissions, quite a lot is involved in this. So we see in broad areas, we are looking for data analysis, people who are very savvy in that, but we are also looking for operations people who can marry up the operations need with the data. And then overall, we have some training that let everyone knows a little bit about data. Thank you.
How about Dr. Khoo?
Yeah, I think data science and data analytics is now very pervasive in many STE areas. I mean, Shann talked about in the area of transport. In A-Star, we have a large group of research domains that require data analytics. Just in my own field, in food R&D, the research institute that I lead, or as well as the Singapore Food Story, where we're trying to up our production of local food. One flank of this food resilience is looking at urban farming. How do we make use of sensors to create smart systems, as well as how do we have indoor farming? And all this requires some data, and then you feedback, you do analytics, so that the growth of the plants that we want to grow, the vegetables, can be shortened, for instance, and that increase the yield and increase the production. Specifically, within SIPI, we are also looking at future food, like alternative proteins. I mentioned in my talk, I have a very rich library, the natural product library, where I can mine for interesting bioactives, and using data, using in silico computational resources, enable us to do our work more efficiently, high throughput, using AI, using machine learning, computerization, and all that. So definitely, in many areas, we see the power of data science and data analytics.
How about footprinting? I think footprinting plays a huge part in the future of Singapore's food industry and research for SIFB.
Well, it is an area that is currently receiving attention. It's still nascent, I must say. All right, because when it comes to footprinting, you also must look at the raw materials. What goes into that, the raw materials that form the layer. And it also requires consumer acceptance. So it is still a journey, but it is a concept that a few people are exploring within the ecosystem.
So yeah, talking about consumer accepting new technology and such new ideas, right? So there's also, I think there's also need to talk about the softer people-centric solutioning, to also take note of the mindset of how people think and how receptive are they to new technology. So Mr. Lam, you spoke about the shift towards EV and AV in your presentation earlier. So do you think Singaporeans are ready for these technologies? And if not, what do you think it would take to change people's mindsets?
Well, first of all, I think the Singaporeans are very open, and especially when you talk about technologies that will affect and hopefully benefit their lives, they are quite aware of what are the contexts of where the technologies are used, and so how it could be used properly. And so with this, and also because of the constraints that we all talk about, we are kind of conditioned and schooled that we remains open, embrace technologies to better our lives, right? So with that as a context, we are optimistic. We have constantly tried out different technologies, and with the technologies, the usage and the business model, not all works, and some of those we do have to pivot or manage it, but the spirit of trying so that we can address our needs as well as the national challenges, I think is quite our DNA. And so with that, I'm hopeful. If you talk about autonomous vehicles, we don't think it is ready tomorrow. It will be some time to come. But we are trialing it today. We are trialing it today because another aspect of Singapore is that we take long-term planning very seriously. I think Johnny will talk about, with land planners, you look quite far ahead. That's because in prepping the land use, we cannot decide and execute it the next day, right? So we have to integrate that. With that in mind, when we trial the autonomous vehicles, for example, we are trialing the deployment concept with the aim to understand the technology. So we understand the technology through individual trials. We try to put it together in a more pilot fashion, which is the next phase that we are going into, with the intent that we tease out issues like, in terms of land infra, do we need to tweak anything? How do we then go into a brownfield or existing town, for example? As well as the people part, we are talking about people-centric applications here. And if you want to deploy autonomous vehicles as public transport or shared transport, public acceptability is key. The technology itself will not work if the public does not accept it. And so in this case, we deploy it and we want to survey our people to see what is their acceptability and how we can tweak along the way to help translate the technology into the users. And so I'm optimistic.
So we have one more question from Mr. Lam here from the audience. So how long do you think it will take to build the necessary infrastructure for EV or for AV? And how can the next generation of engineers help fast track it?
Well, thank you for the questions. I think there are some areas where we can deploy the land transport or mobility modes quite quickly. I think if you look at if you look at active mobility, right, the e-scooters, personal mobility devices where you can easily buy from online purchases can be deployed quite quickly. But many of the infras will be needed if you are talking about, for example, building a new rail lines, turning or electrifying our public transport, public buses. Why so? Because the electric vehicles or buses, for example, would require charging. There are only two modes in a way that can support our applications here. The first is overnight charging, in which case we need to retrofit our depots. We need to put in the chargers. And if you think further, then we need the substation to be able to support the large amount of electricity that we now need. So that is not a trivial matter. If you talk about enabling personal travel, you're talking about private vehicles, then whether is it upgrading the HDB car parks or residential car parks to support electric vehicles, vis-a-vis petrol kiosks, fast charging, but again need a big substations. These are areas that we have shared our visions. You heard my ministers share more just a month ago, and now we need to work on it, and we think that there's room to accelerate it, but we also need to seek citizens' patience that the infra will come with the visions. We'll certainly move towards that.
Yeah. So in your presentation, you talk about that we will be phasing out IC vehicles, and to have all vehicles run clean energy by 2040. So I think that's a really a very ambitious goal that we're actually moving towards too. And speaking of which, I think Dr. Khoo, I think you also have a very ambitious goal here, the 30 by 30 plan. In other words, is to produce 30% of our nutrition needs locally by 2030. So currently, I recall I mentioned about that our local food production is less than 10% of the nation's nutrition needs. So with global supply disruptions and climate change, how are you ensuring that you're actually still chasing towards this goal?
Right. Thanks so much for that question. 30 by 30 is an ambitious goal, but we think that with the right technology and strategies, we can achieve it. There are a few strategies for achieving the 30 by 30. One is to diversify. The 30 by 30 is a local production in terms of nutritional needs. So the government has invested in the last 2-3 years $144 million in R&D program for the Singapore food story. And the Singapore food story has got 3 flanks. The first flank is, as what I said earlier, it is about urban farming. How do we do smart farming using systems, technologies? And as our land for agriculture is very limited. I mean, and our arable land in Singapore is far less than the other agriculture countries. So how do we make use of the constraints and then leverage on technologies to overcome these constraints to produce some of the nutritional needs in terms of vegetables, in terms of fish? The other flank in the Singapore food story is the future food, novel foods. And I think that the public has been fed with many interesting media articles about plant-based food or cell-cultured food. In fact, just 1 month ago, SFA has approved the world's first cell-cultured chicken nuggets. So these are very exciting areas, and it's also one flank of increasing our nutritional needs that are produced locally using very novel technologies. So with novel technologies, novel food coming into the scene, one must not forget the safety aspect. And so under the Singapore Food Story R&D program, there is also that consideration of looking at the food science in relation to these novel foods. So that's what I mean by having a strategy that is multi-pronged, able to predict in advance what are the requirements. I mentioned also about consumer acceptance. So this is also another perspective, another consideration that has to be considered upfront.
It's like challenged. A great challenge in terms of trying to achieve the goal itself.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. So with all these challenges that you've just mentioned, with different strategies, of course, that comes with different challenges itself, right? So what are some of these biggest opportunities that you foresee in your respective fields in the next 5 years? Perhaps Dr. Wong?
Okay, I think for HDB especially, I think we have done very well trying to push for greater livability and sustainability in our housing estates, and we'll continue to do so. However, I think the world is facing a lot of new challenges, things that we cannot ignore. Climate change is one of them, and I think recently, the government has announced the Singapore Green Plan. This is something that HDB will seriously put up, see how we're going to enhance our various programs to not only deliver the Singapore Green Plan, but hopefully stretches the ambition. And I think technology will play a very big role here. Another area that we should not forget would be that our population is also having a higher elderly population. And that is one area that HDB have to seriously see how are we going to improve the facilities, the amenities, and also the infrastructure in our housing estates so that it actually enhances the living experience for the elderly. And one last area is that, of course, I think with the COVID-19, many people have seen that we cannot continue to rely on very heavy manpower sort of construction practices. So this is one area that together, not just HDB, but with BCA, we will be looking at seeing how we can actually drive more automation and robotics to help us at least elevate some of these needs and enhance productivity. So these are some of the challenges, I think, moving forward, key for HDB to look at.
Interesting, very interesting points. How about Mr. Lam? What are some of the biggest opportunities you will see?
Well, first of all, if I look back for the past 10 years, you have seen a lot of changes in the land transport landscape, right? We have the active mobility part we will certainly work on. We also, if you look at the vehicles is going to be more connected, autonomous, and also energy efficient. I think this will then, in a way, look at how these can be deployed, as well as if you put in traffic management, something to watch. Public transport will always be our focus because that is the system that moves most people around, and that has to be inclusive, that has to be efficient, and that has to be reliable.
How about the use of AI technology to also help planning?
Well, the AI technology, data analysis, and all those will come as a form of enabler that cuts across. And so whether this is public transport, whether this is roads and traffic, whether this is active mobility, we believe that there will be good applications to that.
Thank you. Dr. Khoo, you have anything to add?
Well, I think in the area of food R&D innovation, the opportunities is really about the Asian market. If you look at the number of startups that we are welcoming in the ecosystem, the growth in population is in Asia. The market is also in Asia. So in the Singapore's context, we are really positioned at a very sweet spot. Multi-ethnic population that we have enable us to do some of the very exciting food innovation, and then having to also make use of this multi-ethnic population that we have to do our consumer trials. And I think that will be a very valuable opportunity.
There's also importance, the need to actually look into the culture of our population.
Food is very much cultural. I mean, much that, we are a global city, global state. People enjoy Italian food, French food, Japanese food, Thai food. But at the end of the day, we are also very comfortable about eating some of our local cuisine. Our taste buds will not change. And this is something where, that's a reason why for CB, we're focusing on the Asian consumers. And that's also why we're seeing a very high pace of growth in terms of the startups wanting to be in Singapore. Yeah.
So after listening to our panel here, sharing about the various upcoming opportunities, so I'm sure to be at that, to harness all these opportunities, right, you have to be at the forefront of technology. Right, you have to be. How do you actually keep yourself a step ahead of the curve all the time? So, Mr. Lam, could you share more in terms of how do you actually stay up to date?
Well, we work very closely with the stakeholders in the ecosystem. I think the best way to stay in the forefront in a way is, first of all, listen intently to our stakeholders. First of all, our key user. User will give us direct feedback on what works and what do not. We work very closely with the industry, and when we talk about working closely with them, we can conduct trials, we can share information and all those. Because the industry not only bring with them the experience, for example, from the other countries and regions, but also they are constantly looking at how to make their products better and integrated into the local context. And so we work very closely with the industry as well. And of course, we work very closely with the interagencies kind of projects, because we can look at land transport, but if we just look at land transport without integrating with others, then things will not work. So I would say that it is across the board, and trying out yourself, finding out what works or not in a small scale before you scale it up. Thank you.
How about in terms of HDB?
I think not much different from what Shann had shared. I did say that HDB also, we need to listen to our stakeholders. We need to work across agencies and, of course, the industry. But one thing I thought I'd like to add is that we must not assume that we know everything. We must keep our eyes open such that do not be afraid to learn from the overseas partners and to see how some of the things that work for them, can we actually bring them and then adjust them to our culture, our climate, and then test them out over here.
Yeah.
So sometimes, especially like in HDB, we do a lot of engagement with our international partners, attend conferences, and also sometimes do study visits to go there and see for ourselves how other people are actually deploying some of this technology and whether it actually suits us.
Yeah.
So I think what I want to say is that never be afraid to learn. Yeah. That should be the key thing.
Yeah. And with Dr. Wong, we have also one question coming in from your side. Yeah. You mentioned about smart crane system. So are you also looking at other smart systems for other types of heavy machinery, for example, excavators and bulldozers?
Yes, we definitely are. The reason why I use smart crane as an example because it's a sexy sort of thing. So I use it as an example. Smart crane was also important was because we use lots of precast. And with the smart crane, the logistic is easier so that when the components come, the cranes automatically detects and then find which is the safest path to bring it autonomously to the position to be installed. But such smartness does not and should not stop at crane level. I think in a way, even the very use of drones and use of robots to help us inspect sites, ensure safety, look at quality checks, and even doing some of the works on site are some of the things that we are looking into. Now, the examples that you give, like bulldozer and that sort of thing, happy to share because I'm also in MND, Ministry of National Development, the Chief Technology Officer there. I do know that it's not just HDB, but HDB has partner agencies like BCA to look at whether bulldozers and some of these excavators can also be introduce smartness so that you use less workers to control them. And this is not uncommon. Actually, in Japan, they have already started doing it. So yes, definitely, we are going to introduce more smartness in construction works.
Yeah. How about in terms of 3D solar plants? Because we have one question also coming in for Dr. Wong here again. So regarding your plans in collaboration with PUB, are you considering using 3D solar cells to save space and also combat the issue of land scarcity in Singapore?
Definitely. And it's not just 3D solar cells, but all forms of solar-related technology. HDB is very interested in, and we do study them. But however, we must always remember, studying, you can do it in the lab, and you can test out the technology. But earlier I mentioned the business model is important. When we roll it out, it must be cost-effective, works to our climate and to our conditions. Because otherwise, what happens is that it's just a very science sort of experimentation, and it stops somewhere. So our experience from our solar deployment plan is that we tested different sort of solar panels, ensure that it works in our climate, because we are not like Germany or Japan where we have blue skies. We have actually very cloudy skies. What sort of energy can be generated in our sort of climate condition. And then after that, when we collect enough data, share with the vendors, work with them to work out a business model that they can actually help us to deploy this and not just deploy and then they just hands off. They're actually able to maintain it and continue to service us and still enable them to ensure that this is a profitable business for them to continue to serve. So these are the things that we must not forget. Introducing technology is one thing, but ensuring it's sustainable is important.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Wong. So today we are here also to talk to mainly our students here who are also deciding on their career paths to come. So how important do you see STE jobs being in the future? So I'll pose this question to panel here. What new skills might be emerging in your field? Dr. Khoo?
Well, so earlier on, we talked about data science, data analytics. These are tools, these are enablers. I think what's important in entering an STE domain in the 21st century is about having that multidisciplinary mindset. So earlier on, we Shann as well as Johnny talked about some of the challenges, climate change, aging, and in food, we're talking about food resilience, food security. How do we then, knowing that these are the global challenges and they are multifaceted, And there is no one single technology to address a complex problem. So I really welcome young students to come into the S&T career with an open mindset, be willing to be adventurous, to explore, to go beyond the boundaries. And while you might be trained in a very specific field based on your education, but then make use of that initial opportunity to explore the adjacent areas. Being multidisciplinary now gives us the advantage and the edge.
Thank you. How about Dr. Wong?
I'm with Dr. Khoo. Multidisciplinary is very important in today's engineering term. I think for me, I'm actually very closely in consultation and discussion with the universities, and it's to ensure that when we look at the training and the curriculum of the students, we need to ensure that this multidisciplinary sort of culture is brought in. Now, I give an example. Gone are the days where even an engineer or architect is just good at what they are good, their key profession. They have to know things like data analytics, AI science, even social science also, because then that will actually help them with their planning and the architecture works and engineering works. And many of my engineers nowadays have to do coding even in their designs, because it actually helps them not only do faster, but smarter. So I did say that we must have this openness, that we don't just study engineering, sort of the traditional subject areas, but open up ourselves to learn the new skills and new technology that's coming in.
Yeah.
Well, I'm in full agreement with the other two panelists. If I could just add, I think those who join, especially looking at ST and E kind of jobs, will not only rely on your engineering skill sets and the exposures or experience that you have from other sectors, but I'm quite sure because this is public service and the stakeholders applications part will come into play, and how you can in a way go a little bit deeper in your specialized field, but always be mindful of other areas. And so some form of either job rotations or certain multidisciplinary projects will then bring out the best of one's ability in the current context, I would say. Yeah, so full agreement with what the panelists have said.
To summarize more in terms of being multidisciplinary and being exposed ourselves to different areas of work, I think that's very critical as we talk about collaborations, working with different people, and then also say that even the soft skills are also critical skills that will help you in a career.
And if I could add one more, and that is, at the end of the day, I think you hear this over and over again from every one of us, and that is, it is not just the pure pursuit of knowledge and the technology that works for us. It is the eventual applications for the user that really matters. I thought that is the key as we pursue on various specialized fields.
I just want to echo what Shann said. I mean, it is understanding the issue that we want to address, understanding the problems, and I think Shann probably talked about listening to stakeholders. I think that's a very important skill set. While we could be trained as in a STEM subject and we tend to be analytical, sometimes overly analytical, but I think we have to understand what consumers need, what the public needs, what our citizens need.
I think this is a very important advice. So to end off this session, any other advice my panel wants to give to our students here? So perhaps some advice which you wish you had when you started your career?
Then maybe I'll start off. I don't think it's an advice, but just something I feel I also share with the audience here. And that is whether you are fresh graduate, whether you are mid-careerist, I think when you look at public sector jobs, especially in the ST and E kind of areas, if you have if you are already skilled in engineering, for example, or if you have experience in that, actually you already bring some value to the table, right? And especially when we are talking about then using that to apply, there'll be a lot of room for that. So gone are the days, I think, where we say, oh, this is a job that only a mechanical engineers could take on, right? Cars have moved from mechanical to electrical. So those mechanical engineers looking at the cars, are they then not so relevant? I don't think so, because a lot is on the job training. So for those who are looking out for the jobs here, I think attitude, I think some relevant skill sets that you think you can bring and add value to the team are something good enough for you to just ponder and think whether then a public service is suitable for you. Yeah.
Dr. Wong, if anything to add?
For me, is that if you are inquisitive and you have this great urge for creativity and you want to make a difference, then I did have to say that the public service is something you want to consider. I think the panelists here today has shared quite a lot on what we do, including myself. You see there's a lot of opportunities and we're trying a lot of new things. Most important, as an advice, is that sometimes when you try all these new things, never give up. Don't be taken discouraged when you meet small little roadblocks. Pursue and persevere. I would not have been where I am today if I had given up in quite a number of the projects I'm involved in. Of course, the last advice is join HDB.
Yeah, definitely. How about Dr. Khoo?
Well, so all these attributes also very much resonate with my own thinking and research institute that I run. So earlier on, we talked about being open, being adventurous, having a multidisciplinary mindset. Particularly in a research organization like A-Star, very intensive in doing some of the more discovery, more upstream research. We have to be bold, want to push the boundaries, but we want to also not be afraid of failures. All right, that's where we learn. That's where we test a concept or test a hypothesis. If it fails, we move on and then explore other avenues. So that mindset of exploration, ready to try new things, not afraid of failure, and learn through the failures. I think these are very important attributes. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Khoo. So to sum up, I guess one of the key few important advice that we get is that your attitude matters a lot. To persevere, not to give up. Actually be bold at the same time, and also be having a very positive attitude in doing and be willing to accept and embrace new changes along the way. Once again, thank you, Dr. Wong, Dr. Khoo, and Mr. Lam. We have come to the end of today's session. So thank you again for taking your time off to actually share your very valuable experience with us. And thank you for those who are tuning in to today's discussion. I hope you took away some of these very useful insights from the session that will help you decide what's next for you. So do stay tuned for the next session starting in 2 minutes to find out more about a day's work as an STE officer in the public service. See you very soon.